Hello, this is Joseph Trust. Continuing on with the Viper ghillie based foundation by Tactical Concealment, I'll be covering some techniques involving the insert mesh curve brushes inside of ZBrush 4R4. In this video, I'll be covering how I actually created the actual webbing here on the arm, and then this area of edging on the front of the base foundation, using the insert mesh brushes inside of ZBrush 4R4. So to start, here we have the Viper hood that's been fleshed out a little bit more since the last video on the micro mesh details. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to establish some kind of guidelines on the arms here to kind of help me determine the length and width of the insert mesh objects as I draw them. Now if I go and look at the actual images here, you can see the webbing is pretty much evenly spaced around the arm, and this pattern between here and here is a 6x3 grid. So it's going around 6 times around the arm and then 3 times up the arm. So I want to draw a grid that's giving me that kind of base lines so I can use it as a guide when I paint my insert mesh curve brushes. So the first thing I'm going to do is with this hood, I'm just going to come over here to subtool and just have it selected, and then now I'm just going to fill it with a white color. So I'm just going to make sure I have a white over here as my main color, come up to color here, and then do fill object. And what that's going to do, it's actually going to fill the colorize information on the model with that white color. Also, as you notice over here, after you did that, this paint icon appears over here. So this is actually telling ZBrush to turn colorize on and off. So if you come down here to actual poly paint, you can see there's the colorize option. If you turn this paintbrush on up here just by clicking it, you'll see it go off down here as well. So it's just colorize information on the model. Now what this is going to allow me to do is allow me to paint color on the actual vertices of the model. So this model has 1.5 million points, so I can actually establish a color for each of those points on the actual model. So it's kind of like a high poly vertex painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just come up here and make sure I have standard brush selected, turn RGB on, and turn Z-add off. And then I'm going to come in and select a dark color, something around like this. Now you'll see other objects in your scene possibly change color when you choose this, and that's because they don't have any colorize information turned on. So it's just going to take the color of whatever you have selected over here and apply it to those parts of your model. So I'm going to activate solo mode just to isolate the actual arm, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now if I go back to the actual image, you can see that the first line of the webbing actually starts about even with this border for the front of the suit, and then it continues all around the back, and it's about even with the back border as well. So that means that my first portion of the webbing would start about here and then end about right here. So I'm going to establish a first point on the actual model. So I'm just coming to the front, and I'm just going to draw a dot right here. And then it ends probably about right here, so I'm going to draw a second dot right here. And then I need to put in 2 dots in between these two. So I'm just going to put 1 dot here and 1 dot here. And so there is my spacing for the actual webbing. Now if you have any errors, like this dot right here looks like it's a little bit closer than the other ones, so you can just undo here and just repaint these in real quick. It's pretty forgiving. If you want to clear it off, you can just come over and pick white and then paint over, and it'll kind of erase the dot that you drew. So now I'm just going to continue this all the way back with just a stroke, just to get a guideline for where I'm going to actually apply my insert mesh curve brushes. So just going to stroke that back there, and then do the same for the other 2 lines. Now I'm keeping these kind of relatively straight right now. Once I actually get the mesh drawn with the insert mesh curve brushes, I can then position those a little bit more and make them a little less precise. So I'm not too concerned about the overall stroke right here. Just finish that around, and then on this back side I want these kind of be even all the way through, so I kind of have some overlap here. So I'm just going to establish my one line like that. And now I need to put the divisions, the vertical divisions, cutting through this. I need actual 6 of those. So I'm going to need to space this out evenly 6 times. So I know I want a midline pretty much through here. Actually I'll have one mid border just going to draw a dot here and a dot here and draw a connector. And then in between here I need another 2 lines, so I'm just going to come through and draw one line here, and one line here, and then do the same thing on this front part. So by establishing a center, I'm able to, kind of position these lines a little bit better because I can see the start and the end point. So I'm getting a little even spacing. If I just started on one side and just started drawing lines, I could possibly, not have my grid drawn as even as I wanted it to be. So just cutting the dimensions in half and then cutting in half again. It's a quick way to get size stuff done fast. So now that we have this done, I'm going to duplicate this tool. If you have subdivisions, which this object has, when you apply your insert mesh, you're going to have to delete them. So I usually come through and actually will duplicate my tool, and then on the second tool here, delete lower subdivisions. So now I can use insert mesh curve brushes on this model, but I still have my original subdivided model above it if I need to go back to it. So now I'm going to switching over to an insert mesh brush creator file. So here is a insert mesh brush ZTL file that I have. These shapes were created in the same way that the molly strapping was created inside the drop leg Z Classroom video that I did. So just very simple shapes that were just created inside of ZBrush. So this is the actual border that will be on the front, and then this is the actual webbing. So really simplistic geometry that was created inside of ZBrush out of simple primitives. Now one thing to note is that this tool here is the file that I used to create the insert mesh brush that I'm going to use to actually draw on the surface of the Viper hood. Now in here you can see I have a high and a low version. So I have the low version, and then I have a version that has subdivision that's been sculpted on. That's the high. Now I usually have a file that has both low and high in them, and so when I actually create the actual insert mesh object, if I press M, you can see I now have both these versions of these tools inside this brush. So if I ever find the need to use the low res version or use just the high res version, I have both those files inside this brush. So it just kind of gives you a little more freedom to switch between the two depending on what the situation calls for. So that's basically my setup file for the insert mesh brushes for these two objects. So now going back to the hood, so I'm going to rotate to the front, and I'm going to make sure I have my insert mesh brush selected. I'm going to change my draw size down and just draw one stroke across the model here. Now as you can see, the first draw came in really small, so I'm going to come here and adjust my brush size and then re-click on it, and it's still a little small. So just editing that until I get roughly the size I want, and then I'm just going to come and move it just till it gets to the point where it lines up. So that's pretty close. I'm going to scale up my brush one more size. So that's pretty good. Now I could keep continuing drawing all the way around this model here, but every time you draw an insert mesh stroke, it's based on the canvas position to your cursor. So as you can see, as I rotate around this model, I'm actually getting closer to the surface right here. So if I came through and drew another line, even with the exact same size, I'm going to end up with a smaller strip of webbing. And I don't really want that. I want this webbing to be consistent all the way across. So once I have this one kind of shape established, I'm actually just going to want to clone it and move it along the actual mesh. So if I come up to the actual move object now and then draw on it and hold Control Shift and click this inner sphere, I can actually start duplicating this along the surface. And from here, instead of redrawing the actual insert mesh for each stroke, I actually just come in and using the actual transpose tools, just kind of position it where I want it to go. So just a little trick that you can just draw one and then just use transpose to establish where the rest of them are going to go. And so the transpose lines are actually quite nice inside of ZBrush 404. So if you want to just rotate it along the axis, you can just draw it from start to end and then just drag the middle circle and you can see you can start to get it spin like that. And go back to move and just keep holding Control and Shift and moving the actual object. So Control Shift drag, and it'll give me another one, and then I can just keep doing the same functionality all along the arm here. So I'm just going to do that really quick. Draw another transpose line, Control Shift move, rotate again, move it into position. And once you have like these kind of roughly established, you can come in and tweak each of these individual parts. So it's more just a getting the guides and then going back in and editing them after you have them all kind of established. Draw another transpose line, Control Shift move, and then move that into position again and rotate. So it's pretty quick to get these established. It's almost as fast as just drawing the insert mesh lines, so you're not losing too much time. I have two more to do, so I'm just going to move one all the way over. So transpose line, move, and then I'm going to rotate off of this, spin it around, drag this point here, and move it there, and one more, Control Shift drag, rotate this one, and position it with move. And the hotkeys to switch between these are W, E, and R. So W will always go to move, E will go to scale, and R will go to rotate. So you can just kind of use the transpose, and then depending on which one you have, you can just switch to it really quick. You never really want to use move and these endpoints here, because it'll actually end up distorting your mesh. So don't try to use move to rotate. I recommend switching to rotate, and then when you rotate, it's not going to change the scale or the length of your actual object. It's just one little thing there. So now I have, that line almost all the way established on both sides, and since I had symmetry on, it did the other side as well. Now, right now it's still kind of embedded into this actual hood object, so I need to separate the hood from these actual pieces of webbing. So just kind of free up some memory or some points on this actual tool, and I can have it broken off into its own subtool. Now to do this, I'm going to use a function inside of ZBrush 404 called Split Hidden. So if you go to Subtool and you go to Split here, there's a button called Split Hidden. Now right now it's grayed out because I don't have any part of my mesh hidden. If I turn on polyframes, you can see I have a poly grouping for the initial mesh that I was using the insert mesh brushes on, and then each of the webbing pieces has the insert mesh grouping still established on them. So what this means is that I can hold Control and Shift and click the main portion of my tool here, and it's going to hide all those insert mesh brushes. And with those insert mesh brushes hidden, if I come over here and hit Split Hidden, it's going to now generate a new subtool for them. So now we have it broken off from the actual main portion of our mesh as a nice new tool. Now these are still grouped with the initial poly grouping that was established with the insert mesh brush. So I'm just going to come down to the bottom here and just do an auto groups to get them all to be their own individual poly group. Since I had weld turned on the actual insert mesh curve brush, they should just be continuous objects all the way through. So now I'm going to turn back on the initial tool that had subdivisions, and I'm going to turn off the colorize information on it by clicking on the paintbrush. So now I just have the base foundation and the webbing visible on the screen. Now with the webbing selected, I'm just going to select the move brush, so B, M, and V. And now I can come in and move, the actual geo through here to kind of get it to line up with the actual mesh. Now you may end up actually distorting it, a little bit too much. Like say you do something like this. And this isn't actually what we want. It doesn't look like an actual real-world deformation would appear on this actual webbing. And one reason for this is that since this mesh is so dense, when you try to move it, you can often just move a little bit of it and end up distorting it quite a bit. Now, one nice thing about starting this insert mesh brush with a lower res object and then subdividing up is that I can reconstruct the subdivisions. So if I come down here to the geometry tab and do reconstruct, I can actually start rebuilding that low res cage that was initially established on the object. And so you can do this to get to, you know, your original resolution or whatever resolution you want to get to. Now with this, if I actually now move these objects now, I'm not going to deform it as great as I was with all those points. So if I do a move like this or like this, it's still going to give me that nice curve, and then when I subdivide back up, it's going to kind of blend any real harshness out of it. So it ends up, you know, working in your favor. You can kind of position stuff with this lower resolution version, since the insert mesh was established from a low cage, but then still keeping your high res version of the model. And so this comes in, you know, helps greatly when actually, you know, needing to deform pieces like this to make them touch the actual surface of the model. So instead of me just taking this and doing this, which will give me this awful kind of curve here, I can come to the lowest resolution version, go to a rotate, and then just, you know, mask out the part that I don't want to rotate, use the actual transpose tool, and then just rotate the model. And so you can see, you can start getting, you know, a little more functionality out of these insert mesh brushes. Since they are topology, you can just use any tool inside of ZBrush to kind of conform them how you want. Another thing you can do too is that since all these pieces are now separate polygroups, is you can come to the brush menu and go to auto masking and turn on this mask by polygroups. And what this is going to allow you to do now is, now when you actually, you know, start sculpting on a polygroup, it's not going to form another polygroup. So you can kind of now use, you know, rotate tools in a larger fashion. So if I come and rotate this, you can see it's not going to distort any of the other polygroups. Now if I had this turned off and did rotate, you can see all of them are going to go with it. But since we established, you know, auto groups with the polygroups, they're all separate. If we just turn on this auto masking here, whatever group we're on is only going to deform. So another little option that will give you a little more control and a little more freedom when modifying these individual insert meshes on your model. But that's how the all the ghillie pieces on the actual Viper hood were created using that method. And now we're going to come in and show you another little trick to generate this front edging through here.